You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hey folks, Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. The things that makes it official. Welcome to the biggest brain bleed show on the internet. I don't know if that's really true. I've seen a lot of brain bleeding on Twitter, so there might be some of that. But ours is a good kind of brain bleed that expands your brain, and there's a little bit of bleeding because you got to grow it. And then sometimes it gets too big for your skull, which is the problem most people listening to the show have. But as always, refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, facebook.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, and all those crazy places on the internet. Today, amazing young lady on the show. We're going to be talking about her hot new book that's coming off the presses October 21st, 2025. It is entitled, Catch People Doing Things Right. How Ken Blanchard Changed the Way the World Leads, by Martha C. Lawrence, and she's going to be joining us on the show. She's a former editor, one of our favorite book companies that books us all the time, Simon & Schuster and Harcut. She has shaped the voices of many of the world's most successful thought leaders, an executive editor at Blanchard. She has collaborated with Ken Blanchard for more than 20 years, including on TrustWorks, winner of the San Diego Book Award. Her editing credits include multi-million copy bestsellers and the New York Times #1 titles. She is also the author of an Edgar, Anthony, Agatha, and Seamus nominated mystery series through private investigator Elizabeth Chase. Welcome to the show, Martha. How are you?
I am doing really well. And I just have to say, Chris, you have the most amazing intro of any podcast I've ever been on. It's awesome.
Thank you. And it all goes downhill from there. Yeah, that was the peak. We peaked already. So, Martha, give us your .coms, wherever on the internet you want people to find out more about you.
You can go to marthalawrence.com. That's LAWRENCE, marthalawrence.com. And I'm going to be talking about the legendary Ken Blanchard. I highly recommend you check out Blanchard.com if you're interested at all in leadership, whether you're an individual contributor or a giant organization looking to do a big initiative. There's something for everybody there.
Now let's lay a foundation. Who was Ken Blanchard? There's a few people, outliers out there that may have not heard of him. Let's lay a foundation of who this gentleman is.
According to the American Management Association, he is one of the most influential leadership authorities of the last century. I mean, he influenced people like Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, all of today's leadership celebrities, as it were. He actually started out as a university professor studying organizational leadership. He taught at Cornell and at University of Madison. Not University of Madison, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And he was on sabbatical in California. Somebody invited him to speak at a Young Presidents Organization event. Don't know if you know that organization, for presidents of organizations making, I think at that time it was like they had to make at least $5 million a year in revenue. Anyway, Ken was so charismatic during his speeches that, the audience jumped up, standing ovation, and the organizers of the event said, Blanchard, what are you going to do next? You're a huge success. And he said, I'm going to go back to the university and teach. And they said, you're crazy. When you're hot, you're hot. You need to start your own company. And he said, start my own company? I can't even balance my own checkbook. How am I going to start my own company? And they said, we'll help you. So he had this advisory panel, and they helped him start a leadership organization that's been around for 45 years now. So Ken Blanchard he's just basically a leadership legend.
And he's written a ton of books. In fact, one most people are probably aware of is The 1 Minute Manager.
The 1 Minute Manager. He while he was out in California in 1980, he met a guy named Spencer Johnson at a cocktail party. And he was interested in business. Spencer had been writing children's books, and Ken's wife introduced the two of them, and she said, if Spencer writes children's books, you're writing a book for managers. Why don't you write a children's book for managers? They won't read anything else. So they wrote this book, The 1 Minute Manager, which was such an outlier at that time in the 1980s. Business books tended to be long and dry and boring, and people didn't really read them. Ken and Spencer wrote this little 100-page parable about a young man who was looking for an effective manager. And along the way, you learn these 3 secrets of management. And it was just a sensation. I mean, it was everywhere. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 3 years. It was a pass-along book. It sold tens of millions of copies around the world, and it continues to sell today as the new 1 Minute Manager. So that's how most people know Ken Blanchard. Yeah.
He wrote a lot of books in that 1 Minute Manager. They kind of expanded it to a lot of different,
that was the publisher who encouraged that, the kind of the early branding days. Well, we've got this winner with the 1 Minute Manager. Let's put the 1 Minute Manager to work. Let's do leadership in the 1 Minute Manager. Let's do, the 1 Minute Entrepreneur. So there are a lot of books in the series.
Yeah. I mean, it became like, what's that, Chicken of the Soul or whatever?
Yeah, Chicken Soup for the Soul. But I have to say, there's a lot of substantive information in Ken's books. They're accessible and easy to read and fun to read, but it doesn't mean there aren't, heavily researched, really actionable to-dos you'll get out of those books.
Some of the best stories and lessons are parables, seeing other people in how they behave through the eyes of a story, as opposed to me just telling you like how to be the 1 Minute Manager is brilliant.
Spot on, Chris. And that's exactly what Ken said. When you read something that's straight up nonfiction, your critical brain comes in and starts arguing with the author. If you're reading a story, you're just following along in the lives of these characters, and the learning sort of sneaks in there, the back door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
exactly.
That's what we do on the Chris Voss Show. We have the learning sneak in the back door. Might steal some milk and some orange juice and some bread, but that's the cost of doing business.
I was thinking about how smart you must be, Chris, because you have interviewed so many incredibly intelligent people.
I have.
And wow, what a career.
Well, I'm so dumb. I make them look even smarter and more amazing than they already do. But no, I've just been lucky. I've been a CEO and had my companies all my life since 18. And I've always collected lots of different data, followed the news, followed life. And I'm kind of like I'm a master of everything and nothing. I'm a master of half-assed knowing knowledge. And so I have enough that I can usually keep up with people or, make them look even better. But we have such great guests on the show. So in this book, what are we trying to accomplish? Clearly it's not the 1 Minute Manager series. So what are we focusing on in this book?
Here's why I wrote the book. I'm an author first and foremost, and there are so many biographies out there of business celebrities who have done amazing, innovative things. They're fascinating people, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, a lot of those stories out there. But I felt like the time was right to tell the story of someone who became a huge success, not by pushing and shoving for attention or using other people, but by lifting other people up. So Ken Blanchard, not only does he teach about things like servant leadership, but he also lives that way. And so it's just a really inspiring story about someone who basically went from, in college, his professors told him he couldn't write. And he goes on to write one of the best-selling business books of all time. He wanted to be a university dean. That was really what he wanted to do. But apparently there were some recommendations in his file that were very negative. So when he went for those interviews, this was in the days before the Freedom of Information Act, when you couldn't see what was in your personnel file. And he had this really great interview to possibly enter administration at Dartmouth. And he called the guy who interviewed him and said, I thought we really had a connection. I really expected to hear from you. And he said, sorry, Ken, you've got some terrible recommendations. Well, what did they say? And he said, Ken Blanchard's a great guy. He's fabulous with students, but don't let him near the faculty because he has no academic interest. And they said, another guy said, oh, Ken Blanchard, he's fantastic, but he's not particularly intelligent. So to overcome that and go on to become one of the foremost leadership authorities in the world. It's an interesting story. What kind of human being? How do you overcome those challenges? And I think for all of us, we're all in business. We're all doing something. It's an inspiring story. He learned a lot about leadership from his father, who retired as a rear admiral in the Navy, and taught him about leadership. And, when he was in 7th grade, he was interested in Ken was interested in leadership really early in his life. And when he was in the 7th grade, he became the president of his 7th grade class. And he went running home and he said to his dad, "Well, I'm the president of the 7th grade. I'm president." And his dad said, "Ken, that's great. Now that you're president and you have that title, don't ever use it. People follow leaders, not because they have a fancy title, but because people trust and respect them." And so Ken took a lot of those things away with him and really applied those lessons throughout his life.
Yeah. I used to have a thing on my desk. It's in my storage thing. I think I tripped over the other day. And it was a picture of I think an eagle or a wolf, but it basically said, your title doesn't mean anything. You have to earn it every day. Something to that effect. And kind of like what they said, it's not about the title. It's about, what you do every day to earn it. And it is an earned title. I mean, I've owned my companies since 18. But, and I could just lord around and be the boss. Might have done that a couple times. But, every day you've got to earn the trust of your people. You've got to lead them and inspire them. So would you call this like a memoir or a biography? Or
It's a biography. So it is a biography. It is not Ken Blanchard writing. It's me. I actually started doing research for this book back in 2005. So this is the culmination of about 20 years of, interviewing friends, some of whom have passed away, going through correspondence. It's a straight up biography of a leadership authority. It's a story of Ken Blanchard's life. And, just had some fascinating interviews with people like Tom Peters. And there are all kinds of stories in there. Ken has encountered, there's stories about him meeting Martin Luther King when he was in college, and his encounters with Donald Trump, his encounters with Jimmy Carter, Colin Powell. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stories in the book.
I mean, it's probably unmeasurable as how many millions of people he helped. We were joking before the show in the green room about the old Nightingale Conant tapes he used to send you. And then, Earl Nightingale, Tom Peters, Ken Blanchard, all those Brian Tracy, I can't even remember all the names.
Yeah,
I used to get like
John Maxwell. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I even had records at one point early on. My dad had a lot of records of Earl Nightingale and Think and Grow Rich guy, Napoleon Hill, and
Napoleon Hill,
those guys, and
Kawasaki, and
what a great era that was. Like, you don't see too many people emerging like that now as those type of people.
Well, it was this burst of, positive energy. And I feel like that's what we need now. And, you were talking about leadership, and here you have this podcast, and you're in a leadership position. And Ken's message is about, if you're in a leadership position, you're supposed to be serving, not being served. It's all about lifting other people up. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind.
I ever wrote my book, Beacons of Leadership, and talked about, it's kind of a memoir pseudo, kind of my toolbox of what I used to be successful and how I became successful as an entrepreneur. But influences like him, those are the people that shaped me early on. I can't remember when I started getting the tapes, but I never went to college. I just started my first company at 18 and never looked back. And, people will tell me, they're like, well, it's great. You just went and did it and you were successful. And it's like, no, I educated myself. I read books like his. I remember reading the 1 Minute Manager, and I had the whole collection of the 1 Minute stuff there, the whole brand stuff. I read all those books, and probably other of his books that I had at one time in the physical library. And these people shaped me. They inspired me. I probably owe them for the success that I had in life, because that was my education. Instead of, going and learning, and I'm not downgrading what colleges do, but I focused on kind of what Henry Ford did. I focused on what I needed to learn to do the stuff that I wanted to do, as opposed to, there's a lot of stuff you learn in college that, you may or may not use in the future. But I immerse myself in books like his, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. I remember reading that when I was 18. I was probably getting all that material around 18, and it had a huge impact on my life, shaped it, and brought me here. So thanks to Ken Blanchard. There you
Absolutely.
go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you probably have earned about 5 honorary PhDs doing all the work you've been doing with this podcast.
Yeah. And all the companies I've built and failed, and all the fun that I've had. What do you hope people get from this book? What do you hope they come away with?
Well, I hope people, particularly if they're discouraged, about the direction corporate America is going, the direction the world is going, anyone who needs a boost, I hope they'll pick up the book and read about someone who overcame a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
And I hope that it continues Ken's legacy. He's 86 years young now, and people need to know where this came from. The idea that results are important, but relationships are just as important as results in business. It's really all about people. And that's really what I hope people get out of the book.
And I think too, people knowing his struggle and what he overcame as well. Like I talked about, the knowing that we're human. Some people see you when you're successful and they just go, "Oh, you must have just born with this," or whatever. And you're like, "No, I used to be an introvert. I wasn't interested in talking to people on a radio show." I mean, I was a huge introvert as a child growing up, and in my early 20s, I was a huge introvert. And the only thing I had to learn was, owning companies and running them and being the CEO. You had to communicate with people. You have to have a vision. You have to lead people. And then, of course, I learned that through Ken Blanchard and other people from the Earl Nightingale series, or the Nightingale Conant series, and reading books like Ziglar, of course, et cetera, et cetera. And they changed my life. I mean, I shuddered to think about where I would be here today with some of those influences.
That is so cool, Chris. And, what you find out is it's not about you. I think most authors hate doing publicity. And earlier in my career, I hated it. But it's really about the message and serving people, not about you, so.
And sharing your stories, because you just never know who these stories impact.
Yeah. And Ken, his life, I mean, he lost his home to a wildfire in 2007. I mean, yes, he's a white guy. He's an old white guy. And sure, he had certain privileges, no question about that. But he lost his sister tragically young. There are all kinds of things that happened in his life that he had to overcome. So that's another reason to pick up the book, is, to find out how someone else navigates those hardships.
Yeah. And leadership is so important. Like I talked about in my book, and I'm sure Ken has talked about this as well. Anybody can be a leader. There's so many people when I talk to them, they're like, "Well, I can't be a leader, Chris, until someone makes me a CEO or manager." No, everyone can be a leader. The parents are leaders, or at least they should be. Sometimes the kids are leaders. Those teenagers. A person on the street who sees a crisis, a woman in danger. I just saw a woman the other day, a random woman. She fell in the tracks or something. This is over in Europe.
No.
And he grabbed her and pulled her to safety. And, that's a leader. That's taking initiative in a moment where probably everyone, I've seen those moments where people will fall back or they'll go, "Oh, I don't want to get involved." And a leader, makes those initiatives.
You're hitting the nail on the head, Chris, because what Ken Blanchard learned and studied and taught way back when he was a university professor is that leadership is an influence process. It's not in a title. It's an influence process. And you're spot on. The greatest leaders in his life were his parents. His mom taught him, there's a pearl of goodness in everyone. Dig for it. You're not more important than anybody else, but nobody else is more important than you. I mean, those are important messages. And teachers and coaches, if you're influencing the behavior of another person, you are a leader. It's not about a title.
And and you get extensive access to his personal papers, his letters, and his interviews, spanning 6 decades of his career. Boy, that's got to be a treasure trove.
Oh, such a treasure trove. I mean, letters from Colin Powell, a letter from Donald Trump inviting him to, write his favorite advice about playing golf, for a book that Trump was doing at that time with Crown Books, all kinds of stuff. But what really impressed me about going through all that stuff was to see how early Ken was interested in leadership. He actually went to school. Think of this is kind of mind-blowing, Chris. He went to school before Brown versus Board of Education, which was the Supreme Court decision in 1954 that desegregated the schools. Mm-hmm. Ken actually went to a segregated elementary school, but he was a basketball player. He had a killer outside jump shot, and he played around city leagues and became friends with a lot of black kids. And so by the time the schools were integrated, when he went to high school, his high school was integrated. But he noticed there was a lot of siloing. And one of his good friends, Bob Brown, who was a black kid, they got together and started something called the fellowship, the student fellowship. And it was to bring kids from different ethnic groups and races together and make the school a better place. So, awesome. That was interesting to me that he was interested in leadership from the get-go. He was a born leader.
I don't know. We've had a lot of leadership discussion on the show, and a lot of great authors like yourself. And we've always had this discussion. Sometimes, are great leaders born, or can they be developed? I think I must have been a leader from birth. I often refer to me and my brother as two kings, which sounds really narcissistic, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. No, it's just describing what is,
Yeah, but we always I just always had that kind of leadership sort of thing. But I don't think I really became a leader maybe until my 20s, running companies and then kind of honing my toolbox of skills. But I think people can become leaders if they're not. Because like I say, I grew up a huge introvert. Now I'm a huge extrovert that won't shut up. And people are like, can you go back to the introvert thing? And
yeah, well, I think both can be true. There are born leaders, but if it weren't true that we could develop leaders, Ken Blanchard wouldn't have had a successful company for the past 45 years. There are things that you can do to teach people how to be better leaders. And you've probably talked about this on the show, Chris, how a lot of times a brilliant individual contributor will get promoted into a position of leadership, and they may be great at what they were individually contributing, but they're terrible with people. And so you have to show those people, how to lead. You don't just tell people. And hence the title of the book, Catch People Doing Things Right. I think a lot of times managers think their job is to wait around until somebody makes a mistake and then jump on them and correct them. And that, of course, is not good leadership. So the idea,
I call that gotcha leadership.
Gotcha leadership.
Like,
yeah.
I caught you fucking up.
Yeah.
And then they don't recognize you when you do the good stuff. It's only when you screw up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ken used to tell this story about, he called them seagull managers, where, they would just be unavailable until something went wrong. Then they'd fly in, dump all over everybody, make a lot of noise, and fly out,
Wow, that's an analogy to think about. Oh, yeah.
Don't
that
be
makes
a seagull manager,
Yeah, the seagull manager, take a dump on everybody and then, steal all the popcorn. That's easily what I do in the break room, steal all the popcorn. Not sure HR knows that. I think I'm getting a ping from HR now. So anyway, I was going to ask you about that, catching people doing the things right. Was that an axiom of his? Was that something that a mantra that maybe somebody asked him. They said, Ken, you've taught so many leadership lessons over the years. If you could only hold on to one thing, what would it be? And he said, it would be catch people doing things right, because people don't get enough acknowledgement or praising. And it's something that motivates people. Now, let me just clarify. It doesn't mean a shallow, toxic positivity type thing where you just go, hey, great job. That's kind of meaningless. It's not going to have an impact. You want to tell the person, notice what they did, feel how what they did made a difference to you. Tell the person, hey, when you did this, this is what I felt. This is the difference it made in my life.
thank you so much. Even if it's something like catching your spouse taking out the trash when it was your turn, hey, honey, I want to thank you yesterday. I was totally stressed out. And when you did that, I felt so loved and supported. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's amazing how just a little acknowledgement goes a long way. And we're so programmed, Chris. We have negativity bias. It's not our fault. As human beings, our species had to look for what was going wrong on the savannah, and if there was something sketchy, we had to jump on it so it didn't kill us, right? So it's way, way back in there in our amygdala, to catch people doing things wrong. But it really doesn't work in relationships. So that along with many other, Ken has so many sayings, none of us is as smart as all of us. Life is a special occasion. Don't miss it. I love that one.
I love it. And these are all in the book?
Yeah, each chapter opens with a Ken quote.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
That's
and there's
awesome.
a photo section of the book in the book where you can see Ken with his bushy 1970s sideburns as a professor, and picking through the ashes of his house that burned down. All that stuff. Yeah,
I'd like to read about how he overcame those sideburns from the 70s, because I grew up in that era, and boy, they all had them. Even my own dad did. They had those Elvis sideburns.
Did you wear polyester suits?
Oh,
plaid?
yeah.
Oh,
I had a corduroy. Was it corduroy suit? The one it's almost like a carpet?
Yeah.
Those
Okay. I dare you to show a photo of that on your podcast.
I think there's one somewhere. Maybe we should find it. That would be kind of funny. I know there's some suit photos of me back in the day, but yeah, I was a big JCPenney Sears connoisseur of high fashion.
Yeah, why not?
Those old Sears JCPenney business shirts. And then when I finally got successful, I was able to have custom tailored stuff, everything. I have one of those problems where my arms are like 2 inches longer than most people's.
Oh, believe me.
I have a freak of nature problem.
Yeah. Are you a tall guy?
I'm very tall, 6'2", and my dad had huge feet. My dad back in the day, back when Vans was in California and they were just coming up, they're like a little shop. It's kind of funny to think about now, but he had 2 different feet. He had a 14 and a 13, and he had a large 13. So he had to have shoes custom made.
What a pain. Wow.
Yeah. I have the same disease, but mine's not quite as prevalent. And usually I can just fit a 14 on it, so everyone's happy. But I remember those old JCPenney Sears, going down to Sears, getting the cheap ties. And then I was so elated when I finally reached success where I could buy the nice ties. But so as we go out, anything more you want to share about the book and what's going on with Ken Blanchard and all the works that he's doing?
Well, I just encourage people to visit Amazon and pick up a copy of Catch People Doing Things Right for the young manager in your life. If you want to inspire someone who's just starting out in business, or if your dad gave you the 1 Minute Manager, he'd probably appreciate a copy of Ken's biography. Also, again, check out Blanchard.com if you want to learn more about leadership. There's a ton of information on there. And just catch people doing things right. Remember that, if you're in a leadership role, you're here to serve, not to be served. So get your ego out of the way and see what you can do to serve others.
Yeah, it's really important to do that and focus on becoming a good leader. There's so many people I talk to in leadership, and I guess it's shocking to me still that it's around, because I listen to Ken Blanchard and so many of these great leaders all the time. But maybe I just grew up with them and other people didn't. But I ask so many leaders, like, what is your leadership style? Or, what are some of the functions of your leadership? What is your toolbox? And they're like, I don't know, I just lead. And you're like, well, it's not working. So maybe you should have some self-introspective.
People, I think that's what they think, that if you're a nice guy, it's somehow going to interfere with your bottom line. You're not going to get the results. And the opposite is true. When you take care of your people, they take care of your customers. That takes care of your bottom line. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And that takes care of the results. So
checking in with people, touching hearts and minds. Don't actually touch them, folks. That's an old term I used to use, because I would go around my office and I check in with my salespeople or my employees, and I called it touching hearts and minds, but that was in the 90s before things got weird. And for me, it was finding out what was going on in their lives, making sure their heads are clear. Because, salespeople, especially, if they have some sort of conflict at home, or they get, they'll get like little things caught in their head. And when they do, their sales will suffer. So sometimes you got to go in there as a psychologist and help clean them out. But also checking in with people, let them know you care. You're not just showing up going, where are your TPS reports and how many sales do you have today? Damn it. You're like, how are you doing, man? You doing good? And, communicating that you give a shit about their personal well-being, I think, is a real important thing in leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Unlike what I do in the office, like, I don't give a fuck about you people. Do your goddamn work. I'm firing you. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that. Just on Fridays, maybe, when I get angry or something. When I get hangry, I do that.
Yeah, me too. Hangry.
Angry on Fridays. So thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, Martha. It's been wonderful, insightful to have you on.
Well, it's been wonderful to be with you, Chris, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. We'll certainly try. They may, if I die, I hope they just get AI to replace me on the show. Probably won't be as funny or ugly, but, maybe a good-looking person on the show that looks like James Bond or something to replace me. An AI thing would be good. I don't know, but they got to be funny because that's what the people like. Martha, give us your .coms one last time as we go out too.
MarthaLawrence.com, MarthaLawrence.com. And again, Blanchard.com for all you leaders out there.
Thank you, Martha, for coming on the show. Order the book wherever fine books are sold. It is entitled Catch People Doing Things Right. How Can Blanchard Change the Way the World Leads? And please go read his other books too after you read this one, out October 21st, 2025. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and Chris Voss YouTube/Chris Voss. All out there. Anyway, folks, be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you guys next time. And that should have us.